And welcome. We're really excited to have you all here today. This is the California Water Data Consortium's Data for Lunch with Flume. We're going to be hearing about their data collection, residential water data collection and conservation efforts. And I'm Tara Moran, CEO of the California Water Data Consortium. For those of you who may not be familiar with the consortium, we were founded in 2019 to support implementation of the Open and Transparent Water Data Act, sometimes referred to as AB 1755. And as all of you well know, data can and should be at the heart of informed water management decision here in California and beyond. And that really is the vision for the consortium, which is with active involvement from state agencies, NGOs, researchers, the private sector, tribes, and many others. We support the development and improved accessibility to high quality, trusted water data to support better outcomes for everyone living and working in California. And so the goal of our Data for Lunch series is really to learn about new and innovative water-related data methods and technologies, but also to provide a venue to learn from and connect with one another. And so we are really excited to have Sarah Musiker and Joe Fazio from Flume, and Peter Mayer, who on behalf of Flume will be talking with us today about a device that they've been developing for monitoring residential water use. And specifically, we'll hear how they collect and analyze residential demand data and its potential applications during quote unquote regular water years, but particularly during periods of drought and water scarcity. I'm also excited to introduce June Lopez, who will be co-facilitating today's talk with me. June is one of the consortium's board members and is the general manager of Molten Niguel Water District, which provides water, wastewater, and recycled water services to approximately 170,000 individuals and people within Southern Orange County. Under June's leadership, Molten Niguel continues to push for more innovation and for more and better data and information within her own district, where she's shown tremendous leadership, but also for the state more broadly. And so she just continues to be a really incredibly valuable member of our team. And so I'm going to hand things over to her shortly to do sort of a formal introduction to our speakers today. However, before I do so, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. The first is that our next Data for Lunch is on October 19th with Dr. Grenier from San Francisco Estuary Institute, who will be talking about the Delta Landscape Scenario Planning Tool. If you have suggestions for other Data for Lunch topics, please reach out to either myself or Amanda, and we'll drop our contact information in the chat. And then just briefly, the flow for today's meeting. I will hand things over to June, who will do, again, this formal introduction for today's presenters. We'll then have about a half-hour presentation from Flume. And then we'll have time for sort of formal, for questions following that. We'll wrap up our sort of more formal portion of the Data for Lunch at about 1 p.m. June and I will be moderating questions within that sort of more formal Q&A session. If you have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. Please include your name and affiliation. Alternatively, please feel free to raise your electronic hand and we'll allow people to unmute themselves and ask their questions individually. And then Flume has generously offered to stay on for up to a half hour after, so up to 1:30, if you want to stay on and have some less formal discussion about some of the work that they're doing and their findings. So we'll sort of open up the forum at that point in time. We'll still do some moderation, but it'll be less formal. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to June to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. You covered all the hard part and I get to do the fun part. And it's such a pleasure to join you for our Data for Lunch Brown Bag series. I know there's been some really great presentations. I'm excited to hear Flume today. And all the bios of our three speakers are in your meeting invitation, should you want to look through them after the presentation. It's also on the consortium's website, which you can reference for more detail. So let's get started with some introduction. I'm going to start with Joe Fazio. I love his title. He's the Vice President of Customer Success at Flume, not customer service, customer success. Joe is a veteran of the computer software industry with deep experience in product marketing and product strategy. He co-founded two different software companies Agile software, and Givzooks exclamation point at Flume. Joe is currently spearheading Flume's data service practice and is delivering deep analytical insights to its entrepreneur enterprise customers. And next we have Sarah Musiker. By the way, her last name means someone who is of a musical talent in Russian. Just found that out. Director of Utilities at Flume. Sarah has worked across public and private sectors to enable sustainable and resilient water management solutions. She began her career working for the state of California's Delta Stewardship Council. Currently, Sarah heads the utility division of Flume Water, where she partners with water providers to enable real-time understanding of water use down to the drop. Last but not least is Peter Mayer, who is a principal at Water DM and consultant with Flume. He told me not to say anything special about him and just get to his bio. He is a professional engineer and one of America's foremost urban water experts. For more than 25 years, Peter's work has focused on urban water management, water use research, designing and evaluating water efficiency measures and programs, forecasting future demands with and without conservation, preparing water demand management plans, conducting water supply scenario analysis. He's done it all, basically. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing about the data that Flume is collecting and how data supports water conservation. So welcome, and I'll hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you so much, June, Tara, and Amanda for kind of coordinating all of this. Again, my name is Sarah Musiker. I direct utility programs at Flume. And I just want to thank the entire kind of Water Data Consortium team for having us here today. We're really excited to present some of this information, both about Flume and then the data that we're able to collect and we've been analyzing, and hopefully share some valuable insights into what we're doing. I think, as already mentioned, feel free to ask questions throughout, and we'll be doing kind of the question and answer section at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen, and hopefully you all can see the screen presentation here. Yep. Okay, great. Love that. So as some background on us, and I'll be getting into this in a little bit more detail, we sell Flume devices to both individuals across the country, but we also work with utilities across the country that are interested in getting these devices in the hands of their customers. Because of really the data and information we're able to provide. What we do, and our whole goal is to empower people with this information, whether it's customers or utilities or both. And we really use this data for real-time analysis and reporting on historical, current, and future water use based on a number of factors that I'll be getting more into. But, we really look at indoor and outdoor GPCD, water use based off of home size, value, the number of people living in that home. We can look at ETO, weather, a number of other factors, community leak detection, how water use water use in various communities compares to other metro areas. We really can do it all. And we're going to share some snippets of that information with you now. We also host quarterly webcasts where we report out on all of this information I just mentioned nationally. We do this quarterly. We just did ours in July, and I think we're going to be doing another one in early October. And this is like updated by quarter based off of water use trends we're seeing kind of across the country. And we look at it both nationally and then in some of the biggest metro service areas across the United States. And as I mentioned, our goal truly is to provide greater insight and information about how water is being used. And I think it fits very nicely with the mission of this organization overall. So I'm going to dive in. You already got a great intro for us. So you don't need to see this again. Plus, you're already seeing our faces. So I'll just jump right to kind of our whole reason for being. Flume really is founded and was founded during the last drought with the whole goal of really enabling people with smarter insight into what's actually happening with their water, both in the home and then across their community. We really believe that you can't manage what you can't measure. And so we work to empower people with that insight to just make them smarter about their water decisions. As I mentioned, we were founded in the middle of the last drought. This is starting to become very just our new normal. Let's just be very honest. And so our founders were actually engineers, both of whom were getting messages. They're everyday kind of people. They didn't have a background in the water industry, but they were getting all this messaging from the utility saying, save water, save water, save water. But the only way they were able to really see their water use was with their monthly bill. And so they really wanted to see if they could find a way to track water use in real time and get a sense of, if I turn on my sprinkler or if I save water on outdoor use, is that more effective than, taking a shorter shower? They didn't know. And so the big question was, can we do this? And how do we do this? And so, the next question is, I guess, how do we do this? It really all starts with a sensor. This sensor hugs the meter. There's a rubber strap. You can kind of see that rubber strap in this image. It's self-installed by a homeowner in around 15 minutes or less. And it's primarily intended for single family residences. And so that's where a lot of our data comes from. The device itself basically reads the magnetic mutations of the meter, and it reads it every 5 seconds and reports it out every minute. This is actually in many ways pretty unique. The leading meter technology in the field is maybe reading water use every 15 minutes, but often is reporting out about 24 hours delayed. So this is a huge improvement and provides some really incredible immediate action items that can be taken based off of some of the information you're getting. Also comparing this to, let's say, data loggers, let's say you're just using this to collect data use or information on water use across the country. Most of them are left on the meter for maybe a month and then removed. Flume reads water use every day of the year, every 5 seconds at a time. And so there's really no limits on what you're able to collect and then what you're able to see, both kind of across national use patterns and a number of different things. As a result of this, that can be pretty incredible. Once it's installed and the device, as I mentioned, hugs the meter, and we also have a Wi-Fi bridge, that information is immediately translated online. For customers, we provide them with insight into their real-time water use with an app on their smartphone. This kind of allows them to see water use in a way that they haven't been able to before. And for utilities, we provide a dashboard where they can see customer-specific and aggregated data across their community, all of which with the goal to enable, as I mentioned, smarter use and smarter planning. With the communities that we work with, the utilities we work with, this data can be used to catch leaks, conserve water, increase customer satisfaction. We improve land management and population growth planning, and we just provide other valuable insights depending on local needs. For customers themselves, with the information we provide, really in many ways, it allows them this insight into water use that most customers haven't had before. For some, they get a big bill and they're said, why did this happen? I have no idea. This provides them with real information about how they can improve their use. For others, their really only goal is leak detection. Either they're concerned about property damage or they had a sneak leak that they didn't know about and then it caused a huge bill. Around 30% of our customers actually find a leak within the first week of installing, which means they probably already had a leak and had no idea about it. So we help them to capture that. But around 3/4 of our customers actually find a leak within the first month, which gives us a good sense of just how common leaks are. I like to call them equal opportunity offenders. They don't really care who you are. They're going to come for you anyway. So let's provide people with kind of better access to really address that. And then for water budgeting, we also provide water budgeting that alerts people when they're nearing or going to hit a set budget. For some customers, the goal here is to save money. Obviously, COVID had a huge impact on people's abilities to pay their utility bills, but some utilities also have conservation requirements right now. We work very closely with a number of communities in California that have either voluntary or mandatory conservation goals, and so this budgeting actually helps people to meet those. There's a lot of information at once. And I really think that the goal here and what we're going to be talking about today is just how valuable data can be at both the micro and macro level, both across the United States, but in whatever community we're working with. Our goal is to really just analyze and provide real-time understanding of water use. And so this is kind of what we do with our household water use index, the quarterly update I mentioned already, and just empowering people with better data. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter to actually talk about quickly how we do this, the back end, all the machine learning fun stuff there. And Peter, just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Sure, go ahead. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying a nice lunch. We're going to be diving into data and wonking out for you. So the critical analysis that Flume is able to do with their 5-second data is to disaggregate it into component end uses. Currently, Flume is able to utilize the data for leak detection and for separating indoor and outdoor use. And we'll be presenting you a lot of results on indoor and outdoor use. We are actively in the process of working on appliance disaggregation and contextual disaggregation, which will allow full indoor disaggregation similar to all of the residential end use studies that have been done. So toilets, clothes washers, showers, faucets. All of these will be quantified in the coming months, and we'll be able to quantify it essentially for all the data that we've already collected because all the data are stored. Let's go to the next slide. So how does it actually work? So Flume uses a sophisticated machine learning approach. So you start with a 5-second flow trace and then the process first breaks the water, this continuous flow trace into discrete water use events. So that was a use of water and then that use ends. Then it calculates a set of statistics about each water use event. Then using a set of complex rules, and this is really where the machine learning gets in, the water use events are then classified into indoor and outdoor. And Flume has really advanced the science of doing this sort of classification using machine learning. And particularly, they've developed an extensive training data set, which is what you really need. You need to have a data set of known water uses. Like, I know for a fact that that was a clothes washer. I know for a fact that that was an irrigation run. And one of the ways that Flume has done this is through a partnership with Orbitz, which is an irrigation manufacturer. And so actually the Flume device pairs with an Orbitz irrigation clock. And so then Flume knows every time that clock turns on and every time it turns off. This then provides them access to literally millions of individual irrigation runs from these customers that they can then use to train their software to recognize other irrigation runs in a similar way. That's essentially the approach that you use. You develop this data set of known and absolutely positively identified water uses. Then the software is then trained to be able to recognize these in the future. And it's a process of continuous improvement where you can adapt your methodology. Yeah, go ahead, please. I'm sorry. All right, so what does the data look like? This is kind of cool. This is a month of 5-second data. Each line is 1 day of data. And each of those blips that you see on the line is a discrete use of water. And it may look like, what the heck are we looking at? But let's go to the next slide. And you can see how pattern recognition starts to pull these things out. So what we see going on at the same time, every single day, this very large use is timed irrigation. And then there's also a similar large manual irrigation event that's going on also. So in this way, you can start to see how the nuances and the detail of the 5-second data enables this level of disaggregation. Let's go to the next slide. So here's another, this is from a different house, but this is another month of water use. And if you look at this, you say, oh my goodness, there really are some patterns that are emerging. You can probably see the irrigation with all the different zones showing up very clearly. But let's go to the next slide. We'll actually see there's a further disaggregation here. This house also has a water softener. And so the water softener it regenerates, is set to regenerate on a timed cycle every single night. And so that's what you're seeing. It's not every night, it goes every 5-7 days. It really depends on the water use, but it's a consistent pattern. Then you also see the irrigation events. So this gives you the idea of how Flume is going about this process of disaggregating indoor and outdoor water use at the household level, then taking all of this information. And that's what Joe and I are going to show you next, is what we're doing with these data and all the remarkable analysis that are possible.
Peter, do you want me to talk a little bit about
I think Joe was
from 1 minute to 5 seconds?
Yeah,
Joe can do it too. Great.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll chime in now. So we've talked a lot about 5-second data. So we want to show you just a little bit more about what 5-second data actually looks like. Before we had 5-second data, our first generation device actually collected data once every minute. And you can do a lot with data from once every minute. But as I'm going to show you in a second, you get a lot more granularity with the 5-second data, and you can do a lot more with it. So Sarah, if you go to the next slide. What we're looking at here is somebody's water use by hour. And this is traditionally what you would get out of an AMI system, for instance. And this is, I have 95% of the AMI systems I've seen collect data and store data every hour. And looking at this, you can see at 2 a.m. there's 4.5 gallons used. At 3 a.m. there's about 4.5 gallons used. And honestly, you know, it was 2 a.m. was probably a toilet, maybe. You could probably kind of guess what happened, but you really can't tell a lot from this level of granularity. So Sarah, let's go to the next slide. Now, looking at that same data by the minute, you get a little more granularity, but it's really still, you just don't have a whole lot of idea what this is. I can tell there's probably a little toilet flapper leak here at 3 a.m. There's this little blip that's going on, but these other kind of spikes, I don't know. I mean, they could be toilet flushes, but that's a lot of toilet flushes, so you just don't really know. So Sarah, go ahead and go to the last slide. And Peter, you're the disaggregation expert and looking at this 5-second data. What do you think this is?
Well, that's a dishwasher. That's the run of a dishwasher. 6 different cycles, all almost identically sized in volume. But when you look at the data aggregated up higher, you would never be able to recognize this. There's a toilet flush. The higher usage that occurs right at the end is probably a toilet flush. But this is clearly a 6-cycle run of a dishwasher.
So let's look at another example. Again, we're looking at 1 hour data here first. Now we're looking at 6 p.m. there was 90 gallons used. At 7 p.m. there was 50 gallons used. Again, you could probably guess that's got some outdoor irrigation in those blocks. That's a lot of water to be used in an hour. But let's go ahead and go down to the minute level and take a look at what that looks like. So at the minute level, this is definitely some irrigation. In fact, this is probably 3 zones of irrigation. You kind of start high, then it goes down and then goes back up again. There's also some other water use maybe before and after it. So again, you can kind of tell it's mostly irrigation, but again, you probably couldn't classify some of this other stuff. So let's go ahead, Sarah, and go to the 5-second view of this. Now we go to 5-second view, and Peter, again, I'll let you do the analysis.
Well, so if you just start at the left, what you've got is clearly indoor use, probably toilet flushes, miscellaneous faucet use. Then you have a 3-cycle irrigation system that runs with 3 different flow rates. There's also indoor use that is going on top at the same time. This is an example of simultaneous use. And then there's a continuation of faucet use or other miscellaneous indoor use that's occurring afterwards. Flume has been developing the ability to actually destack simultaneous water uses, and that will be part of the indoor disaggregation. So we'll be able to separate out when there is a toilet flush that occurs on top of a base event like this irrigation. That's important for improving the accuracy of the disaggregation, particularly between indoor and outdoor.
Well, great. Well, let's go ahead and get into what we do with this data now. So half the battle is collecting the data and then analyzing the data, but then you aggregate all this data together and you get some pretty cool insights that we're going to show you here next. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And let's go ahead here.
Looking good.
So first of all, let me talk a little bit about all of these flumes that we have across the United States. We literally have tens of thousands of flumes installed across the United States. These dots on here show the concentrations of flumes. Red means there's just a really high concentration. And then the big red dots are the highest concentration. The small blue dots are the lowest concentrations. They tend to be in populous areas. For the top 15 metro areas, which I'll be showing you in a little bit, tend to have a lot of flumes there. So we tend to get flumes, again, congregated in those highly populated areas. Today, we're going to talk, since this is a California-focused talk today, we're going to concentrate on California. Again, you're going to see this kind of high concentration of flumes across mostly the seaboard, because that's where, most of the people in California live. But also we've got quite a few flumes out like in areas like Palm Springs, also out in the Sacramento area, and kind of little dots everywhere else. So let's start by looking at indoor use. So what we're looking at here is we are looking at basically over here is 2021. So the first 2 quarters of 2021, spanning all the way back to Q4 2019. So we've got a good 7 quarters of indoor water use data. And on the y-axis, what we're looking at is indoor GPCD, so gallons per person per day. And by the way, we know how many people are in flume homes because we asked them. So this is self-reported data, so we can get some really good GPCD numbers from our customers. So Peter, there's some obvious things I think to point out on this graph, so I'll turn it over to you for some analysis there.
Yes, well, COVID and beyond, to COVID and beyond is what we see here. So the story of COVID, you enter it around just under 45 gallons per person per day indoors on average, and then bam, the stay-at-home orders, people really were following the rules. And you see indoor GPC peaked at over 80 during that, as all the flushing was happening, all increased showering, increased faucet uses, things like that, and then stays elevated essentially, and has not quite returned back to the pre-COVID levels. A few GPCD higher. So I think everyone expects and hopes that we are going to get back to pretty close to where we were, and we're reasonably close, but we're not quite there yet.
But overall, even at these elevated levels, I mean, this is still a pretty efficient indoor GPCD number.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's exactly right. And there's been a lot of debate about how to set indoor GPCD in California. And this suggests that on average, Californians are using under 50 gallons per capita day. And as we'll show you, that there's metro areas where they're achieving even lower levels.
So just for context, we presented this data that I'm going to show you right here at our last webinar, where we look at the top 15 metro areas in the United States. But just to give you some context, over here are the names of these top 15 metro areas. The biggest indoor water user per capita is Phoenix. Not sure why that is, and we're going to figure that out here in the next quarter or so when we do this disaggregation. We think it might have something to do with evaporative coolers. So we have some theories, but we're digging into that. And you'll see here are the, this is just for Q2 2021, and these are the average indoor GPCD numbers for each of these metro areas. You can see here, Riverside, I've got highlighted here because 3 of the 15 top metro areas are in California. So I've got Riverside, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, kind of showing you where they fit kind of within these top 15 metro areas.
And these are big metro areas. So San Francisco includes the entire East Bay, South Bay. It's much broader. You can see just on the map how broad the Riverside area is, and LA, I believe, includes all of Orange County as well. So,
Yeah.
so there's no single water utility there. There's even no 2 water utilities. There's multiple water providers that are being conglomerated into all of these. Again, though, I think it's important to note that all of these providers, we're seeing indoor use that is quite close to the levels that the state was looking at. And 50 GPCD is one of the goals to be set for 2025. They're looking at 42 GPCD possibly as a goal for 2030. San Francisco would in the served metro area is basically already there. So this does suggest that these levels of efficiency are in fact likely to be achievable. It's important, though, to understand why there are differences, because to the extent that differences are driven by things by evaporative cooling, which may be more difficult to incentivize or change versus something like toilet volume, which it's much more easy, then there could be some challenges in the future. But these data are going to be fundamental for understanding and for tracking water demand. This is just for 1/4 of 2021, and I don't know if people appreciate how remarkable it is to be seeing data that is so new, so fresh, being presented in this manner, across large geographies. It's a great leap forward in our understanding of water use and be able to measure water use across geographies.
All right, well, let's look quickly. I thought it'd be interesting to just graph what California's indoor water use looks like versus the rest of the nation. And I thought there were a couple of pretty interesting things of note here, Peter.
So we're looking at, this is, water use really on a daily basis going all the way back to 2019 and then all the way through 2021. It's important to appreciate, just the scope of and the precision of the data here. So the lines dance fairly close together through 2019 into COVID, and then you see a stronger response in California, I would say. And an elevated response even over the post period of going through 2020, where usage remains higher, and now it's gone back to pretty much, in fact, exactly identical, and they're overlapping. But I do think it suggests that there was perhaps a stronger response to staying at home in California than was observed elsewhere across the U.S.
Yeah, pretty interesting here. And I think this is a giant difference here of almost 15 gallons per person per day. So I think definitely California definitely locked down a little harder than the rest of the nation and took, as you said, longer to come back. Here's another interesting view of indoor water use in California. And what I did here is I took a look at every California county that had at least 100 Flume devices. We think 100 Flume devices is a good statistical sample. So, and some of these counties actually have thousands of Flumes in them, but all of them have at least 100. And so down here on the bottom, you see labeled the different county names, everything from Riverside all the way down to Marin. And then on the y-axis, we're looking at the average indoor GPCD for last quarter, so for just Q2 2021. So we're going to talk more about Marin later, Peter, but pretty interesting that they had the lowest indoor GPCD of all of these counties.
Well, the lowest by a significant amount, really. I mean, they stand out for having low water use, and that is directly a result of drought response. I mean, they have intentionally sought to reduce demand by 40%. And so they are actively messaging, doing more than messaging. They have restrictions in place on outdoor use that we'll be talking about. But I think this is evidence of the impact that their drought restrictions and drought response are having.
Yeah, definitely. That's pretty big difference there. Well, great. Let's quickly look at outdoor use. I think outdoor use probably not as interesting as indoor use, but I think this is pretty much what you would expect. Summer months, people use a lot of water outside, and winter months, maybe not as much.
Right. Well, so this is gallons per household per day, so not per capita anymore. And also, we're lumping together all of the different climate zones and everything. That's why it's not perhaps as useful just looking at it this way like we did with indoor, but it's still indicative of the seasonal patterns of use that you see throughout California. And so there really is, even across a state with as warm a climate as California has, a strong seasonal component to outdoor use.
I think it is, though, to look at this same curve, though, and just overlay California, which is in orange, over the rest of the nation, which is in blue. Maybe not a fair comparison with California versus the rest of the nation, because there's a lot of states that don't use a whole lot of outdoor water. But a couple of things that jump out here. One is kind of the difference in the magnitudes here, and the other is that it didn't rain a whole lot last year. In the winter here, and there's this kind of winter spike here that we don't see in the rest of the nation. So there are some interesting kind of things to point out there.
Yeah, wintertime here, outdoor use is more likely to occur for sure in California. And the rest of the nation is averaging over thousands and thousands of those dots that we saw. So everything from Texas to Georgia to Maine. So again, this is just more sort of eye candy with the data, but it gives you a sense of the types of comparisons that are become possible looking with this level of data, and also the remarkable organization that Flume has brought to these data.
Here is probably the most meaningful of the outdoor comparisons, and what we're looking at here is outdoor usage, again, just for last quarter, so Q2 of 2021. On the y-axis, we're looking at the average outdoor usage per household per day. And again, we've got all of the counties listed here on the x-axis. And Marin, although not the lowest this time, is pretty low, especially when compared to some of these other counties.
Yeah, they'll probably be disappointed that they're not the lowest, given
Yeah.
that what they're trying to achieve there. But yes, I mean they're the big drop off for sure. And all of those Northern California counties that you're seeing there are experiencing drought and are likely receiving similar messaging to what in Marin is. You know, they're all in the similar media shed, so customers there are likely to be being influenced also.
So speaking of Marin, and you've alluded to this already, and those of you who were on our webcast last month saw these slides. But what we thought it would be fun to do is, since Marin is right now, we don't mean to pick on Marin, but they are actively trying to get their customers to cut water usage by 40%, and that may actually go up. But we thought it would be interesting to actually take a look at what's going on with their water use in Marin and compare it with California and Los Angeles, just as a comparison. So what we have on this chart is we're looking at April of 2021 all the way through June of 2021. So basically the 3 months of Q2, so basically last quarter. And what we're looking at here in blue, we're looking at the outdoor water use per household in Marin. So you'll see here the water use in Marin is the lowest of these three curves that we're showing. In yellow, we're showing the Los Angeles metro area. And again, it's the Los Angeles metro area, so it's more than just Los Angeles and the surrounding areas, and that actually includes Orange County. So that's in yellow. And in orange, we're showing the rest of California. And you can tell that the yellow curve and the orange curve are going up, while initially the Marin curve was kind of heading up, but then started to flatten out. And just one more data point before I hand it over to you, Peter. Basically, Marin implemented their drought restrictions kind of in this area here. And I think you can really kind of see that here on this chart.
Yes, yeah. You see the decline with the spikes, related to, temperature increases and various days of the week also, because they're starting to mandate which day of the week. And so if many people are irrigating on the same day, you start to see these type of spikes. They would have liked to see this decline continue. It basically, I would describe flattening out through the summer. Which is fine if you've achieved the level of reduction that you need, but if you're seeking additional reductions as they were beyond what they had achieved, then you're actually looking to do more. But honestly, this is one of the first times where they've ever been able to track this closely, how customers are responding. So it's providing really useful real-time information that's helping them to make decisions about adapting their drought response, which is really what you need to do. It's a constant adapting process to achieve the demand reductions that are required.
So let's take one more look at Marin's data, but this time, what we did on this graph is we basically took every day again, so the 90 days between April 1st and June 30th, so again of last quarter, and we graphed every day of outdoor water use in Marin, and that's in blue. And then what we also did is we overlaid ET, evapotranspiration, on top of that curve. And normally when we do this, the curves kind of dance together. They're actually pretty in sync. But again, Marin started enforcing watering restrictions kind of in May. And it's kind of interesting that these curves kind of stay in sync. Then all of a sudden, when these drought restrictions come into play, you start to see the divergence of these two curves, which I think is really fascinating.
It really is, but what kind of blows my mind is that they even as they diverge, the bumps and the blips, the changes are still appear to be corresponding to each other quite closely. So there's still a climate response, even though the volume of use went down. So originally it was mirroring or matching the climate requirement quite closely. Then it dropped below the climate requirement, but still with following very much the patterns of the climate at the same time.
Tara, I've got a more interesting graphs I could show. I think we're already running over, so you tell me, you give me a guidance on whether we should cut it or continue to show graphs.
Why don't we go ahead and transition? We are getting a few questions. And so why don't we go ahead and transition, and then feel free to pull up graphs where you think those would be helpful in guiding discussion moving forward. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Do you guys have a few extra things you want to wrap up, or?
No, we're ready.
Yeah, we're ready for questions. Sorry,
right.
Sorry for that abrupt ending. I just looked at the clock and realized we were going over. So sorry about that.
No, no problem. You're with the right crowd here to be nerding out on data and graphs. And what we really saw there is a lot of great questions around that. So I think people are excited to dig into some of the discussion. But first, just want to say a huge thank you to all of you. Great presentation, really, really interesting. And just a fantastic demonstration of the value of data and the value of real-time data to really be able to dig into some of these nuances and really start to understand what's going on. So thank you all for that. And I'll go ahead and kick things off. We had a question from Tim Parker, who wanted to hear about, this was something that you had flagged with respect to the Phoenix data. So his question is on evaporative cooling and its application to desert basins, and how realistic is it? What's realistic in terms of the conservation potential within those areas? And so I guess it would be great if you could talk a little bit about that. It sounds like that's something that you're currently digging into. So
we are actively, and we are not the only folks, but we are among the groups that are working to understand the water use of evaporative coolers better. There's a lack of information, but I think the point being that the question is the relevant one. Is there any water savings possible? I mean, is it just sort of like a fixed deal, you know? I mean, obviously, if it's leaking or if there's a problem with the system, sure, then but that's not evaporative cooling water, that's leakage. So yeah, we're very interested in this. We're also very aware that evaporative coolers come in all shapes and sizes, starting from, essentially units that you fill up by hand, with a flower pot type of a thing, or maybe you a garden hose that you could attach to it, and then go all the way up to much more extensive installed systems in homes. The installed systems are the ones that will be able to track very closely with Flume devices, because there'll be a regular pattern which can be disaggregated. Something like where it's filled up by hand, it just looks like faucet use. It's indistinguishable from other faucet use. So it would just result in maybe a higher level of faucet use at a home. So we'll never have a perfect understanding of all of the water that's used for evaporative cooling, but we're working hard. And I think, again, the relevant question is there anything there for water savings? And the answer may be that there's less there than people hope.
All right, I'll take the next question, Tara. So this is a question that I think many of us have, and it's a combination question between Raphael and Deb, but it goes really hand in hand. And the first question is, what percentage of water users are you collecting data for? And related to that percentage, is the percentage and the demographics, the users you have data for, are they similar enough to realistically compare the counties in the way that you laid it out?
Great question. I can take the first part of that question, Peter. Maybe you take the second part of it. So in terms of what percentage of water users in the United States we're collecting data for, it's still a very small percentage, obviously. There's 70 million plus single family homes in the US, and we're in tens of thousands of those homes. So still a very small percentage. What I will say, though, is that for certain water districts, we have a very high percentage of users using Flumes in those districts. And we think that 100 Flume devices is initially good to start really getting this data. But in some of these water districts now, where 5, 10, 15, 20% of the users that have Flumes, that data is just looking so solid and so, in many cases, representative. And the cool thing is when you have that big of a sample, you can then start to pick and choose the devices that you're going to get data from. So if you really do want to find a representative set, you can then say, okay, I have 10,000 flumes in San Antonio, but I'm only going to look at these 5,000 because they're mostly representative of what San Antonio looks like in terms of house value, lot size, income levels, those types of things. So we can really start to do some really interesting things looking at representative sample sets. And Peter, I'll let you answer the question about comparing these counties. And
sure. Well, I think it's important to understand also, where we've come from. And so most of the end use data that we've relied on, and I spent my career collecting data from a few thousand homes. I mean, literally less than 3,000 single family residences comprised the first residential national, and pretty much every residential end use study that's ever been collected up to this point. We were working with small samples ranging from 60 homes to 100 homes per utility, scientifically selected, of course, but still very small, and then collecting data for 2 weeks at a time. Just 2 weeks, and that would be it. So now with Flume, we suddenly have a situation where we have data from tens of thousands of customers. Now they're not carefully selected samples, but it's almost like an overwhelming volume. And then the time period where it's no longer just a 2-week window, it's years of continuous use. So the patterns and the consistency of particularly in indoor use, I think, is really emerging from these data. So do we have enough to compare the indoor water use of these California counties? I would say absolutely. Is it the exact gallons per capita per day if you took the meter data for every member of that county? No. But nothing, no perfect sample would ever give you. It's a very reasonable estimate, though, of the indoor water use, particular for those jurisdictions.
It's
I
also worth
appreciate the
noting.
answer.
Oh,
Go
sorry. I
ahead,
was just
Sarah.
going to add one quick sentence, which is it's also worth noting that it has tracked for communities that have used this and have AMI data, because we work with many communities that have AMI fully deployed. It's tracked along the same lines of what we're seeing there. So we do have some kind of general proof as well that this is really right on the money, and sampling has been really effective.
Great. And I have some questions myself, but I'll turn it back to Tara because we're getting some good questions on the chat.
Sure, I agree. I similarly have questions, so we might have to wait to the informal. But yeah, we have a clarifying question from Thomas Wong, who was wondering whether the outdoor GDP or GPHD data includes commercial and business customers, or if it's purely residential.
It's purely residential. It's important to understand the Flume device will work on any positive displacement meter from a 5/8 inch up to a 2-inch meter. So it's nothing to stop it we're functioning on a small commercial, but the vast majority of the installations so far are in single family, and we have specifically excluded any accounts which are not single family residential so that we know that that's just what we're looking at.
Great, thank you for that. June, you want to ask? Yeah.
Sure, it's from Bert Handy. Can the system be placed on a pipe to indoor or outdoor to monitor the designated area?
unfortunately, it has to go on a meter, so you can't just wrap it around a pipe. It basically, as probably everybody on this call knows way better than I do, inside of a positive displacement meter, there's a magnet that spins. And basically, the faster that magnet spins, the faster the flow rate. We're essentially reading magnetic signal that comes off of that magnet. So unfortunately, if you just put it on a pipe, there's nothing for us to actually read. There are some that you can strap to a pipe, and they basically read the kind of the ultrasonic through sound. They try to figure out a flow rate. They're not very accurate, and it's really difficult to get those to work on different pipe sizes and different pipe materials because they all have different properties. So anyways, that was a long-winded answer to that question. But
I want to also throw it, if you're looking for irrigation, let's say, to try to understand how much is going on each zone of irrigation, the Flume actually works very well for that, because the 5-second data allows us, as we showed in the slide, allows you to delineate when those different irrigation zones are going off. So it is possible to quantify the volume for each zone. And so if you know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can and know the areas, you can easily do a very accurate water budget for outdoor use using the Flume device. It also works on a dedicated irrigation meter too. So if you have a dedicated irrigation meter that you want to track the same way, you could.
Your turn.
Thank you. So we have a question from Heather Rose, who is asking about sort of some of the training behind it. And so she asks, does Flume plan to add a feature where users can enter in their appliance information to actually improve the data being reported? So if, for example, I want to put in that I have a Bosch dishwasher and it uses X number of gallons, and would that be useful in improving your data outputs?
Yeah, we love that idea, and we're in fact, we've developed some of this where we are. It's usually mostly we're working with people we know, who have volunteered to help us, where we actually ask them, was that a clothes washer? Was that, or they tell us specifically. And ultimately, we would love to have a library of every different clothes washer. Well, that's way down the road. I don't want to overcommit, but it's certainly something that we're thinking about. I think it'd be more a situation where you would tell us, hey, I've got a Bosch, XYZ model, and then the Flume would say, okay, that model typically uses 5 gallons per load. Yours is using 7 gallons per load. Maybe you're using the setting. You could change the settings and reduce volume. I mean, there's ways, I think, of using these data to help people to understand how to improve their efficiency.
Yeah, that's also something I was just going to throw in. We have the app, and so we're getting better as well as we're collecting this data of also creating opportunities to encourage people just through everyday use of like, hey, compared to other homes of your size and your lot size, you actually use an exceptional amount of water. Here's some water saving tips. That's something that I think we're working towards. This is something that many utilities have engaged with us about, because obviously, depending on their unique needs or what's going on in their community, finding different ways to integrate, smarter use is just always valuable kind of across the board, whether it's, water savings itself or catching leaks or kind of just managing water use overall.
This is a good question from Deb again, because it's partly a question and a bit of a commentary. And I was thinking about this as well as I was listening to the presentation. And she's wondering whether this is more effective at measuring more like affluent communities where people can afford to buy these sensors. And the second part of that is people who are trying to cut back their water use are presumably the ones that are buying this and installing this because they want to use less. So it seems like it should be somewhat of a biased sample because it's not really reflective of, say, everyone.
Peter, do you want to take that?
Sure. So I think that's a fair critique, and it's certainly possible. Now, I have to say that Karen Guz from San Antonio actually thinks the exact opposite. She thinks that it's actually higher water users who are using Flume, and that the likelihood of affluence is likely to actually increase water use. We've done comparisons, particularly comparing our estimates of indoor use and what you would get if you were to use the billing data, and we're seeing really very similar results. So it's possible. I mean, there's certainly possible that they could be biased. I mean, our hope is that Flume users actually have found and repaired leaks, and we know that actually is happening. So it could be that there's less leakage in particular. I think that would be the single most likely thing to be from the Flume sample. One of the things I don't want to give away all of the analysis that we've done, but Joe and I have looked at the influence of the age of homes. So we have homes, they're from 100 years old all the way up to brand new, all across the country. And we've looked at indoor use, and we're not seeing an influence of the age of the home anymore on indoor use. An old home is just as likely to be as efficient nowadays as a new home. That's a really important finding. That suggests that the retrofits has really been very successful, and that now what's accounting for differences in indoor use has less to do with the age of the home, more to do about the specific fixtures and appliances and how those things are being used.
Can I throw one other additional element in there? It's a great question and something we think deeply about because obviously we want to make sure that our information is representative. We work with a lot of utilities that provide actually pretty substantial upfront discounts to customers. So instead of your standard generally available rebate, where maybe someone goes out, buys a toilet at full cost, and then applies for a rebate post-purchase, which can really, let's be honest, limit people's ability to purchase that toilet in the first place if they can't afford the price up front. We actually do a lot of pre-application of rebates. And so we lower the cost of the device. There's some communities where the device is $50, which really has increased equity and eligibility of access. The other thing to note is that because we work with a lot of communities that are thinking about their low income populations or thinking about, how can we create better opportunities for perhaps disadvantaged folks to track their water use so they don't have really high water bills. We have actually developed programs and have been working with communities to target those communities, which we really hope helps to kind of address that and get a really more representative sample than you might see with other rebate programs overall.
So thank you all for that. And I think what we'll do is maybe we'll pause here and just sort of say a huge thank you to Flume for being here. We'll use this as a transition to the sort of what we've called the less formal piece, but this will be sort of the end of this main piece. If you need to drop off at 1, please feel free to do so. And then we'll sort of open up the mics, and I will kick things off with a question that we already have in the chat. But then also I'd encourage people to just feel free to unmute themselves if they have questions that they'd like to ask. And we can sort of have a bit more of an informal discussion as well. So thank you very much for being here. Great to hear all these wonderful insights. Really appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining. Okay, and with that, we have a question from Lindsay Edelman, who asks, how is the data protected? And how is home water usage can be very indicative of someone, if someone is out of town or the like. And so how are you protecting customer privacy to ensure safety?
It's a great question. So a couple of things. First of all, we never share a customer's specific water use information with anyone unless we have their explicit permission. And we actually do have their permission in a lot of cases. So for instance, if somebody buys a Flume device through a utility program where they're getting a large rebate and the utility is subsidizing the device, one of the things the utility will ask them for in exchange is the ability to actually have access to their water use data. So that's one example of where we would have a customer specific permission to share their data with their water utility. We do similar things with insurance programs, where insurance programs will actually subsidize the devices as well. And so those are the only cases where we will share specific information with, again, with a utility or an insurance company, and again, only when we have permission. Now, we also look at the data in aggregate. So we might take all of the data across the nation and look at every Flume, but we're not saying Joe Smith at 111 Main Street is using this much water. We're just saying on average, users in San Bernardino County are using this much water. So in that case, we're not giving up any personally identifiable information. So as a Flume user, you can feel secure that we're not like selling your data to the highest bidder, like Apple or Google or Amazon or any of the evil companies. So we're nice.
And I'll just add that she had a follow-up question, and Sarah, it looked like you wanted to add something to that.
I was muted.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
And Lindsay's follow-up was, what about if you're hacked, or like if your system was actually hacked? So.
And that was actually what I was going to get into, Joe. I know that we've gone through like some extensive background checks from the insurance companies we work with. Do you want to quickly speak to that?
Yeah, I'll just say I'm not qualified to give you how we make sure that your data doesn't get hacked, but I will tell you that not so much for water utilities, but when we do partnerships with insurance companies, we get a forensic audit where they go through every single security procedure. How's the data stored? Who has access to the data? Who's got the keys? Do you have stuff printed out? Where's the filing cabinet? They go through all of that. And we have big insurance partnerships where, we've been through that audit several times. So we feel pretty confident that our data is secure.
Oh,
And at the end of
you're
the day,
muted.
it's not credit card information we're storing, right? It's water use data. Yeah, you could probably tell if somebody's home or not, but it's not, it's not people hacking into your baby monitor or into your Ring doorbell. It's, the data is not super useful, I think, to a hacker.
And now people can still add questions into the chat or just open up their mic. Because I do have a question, but I'm
Go
gonna
ahead.
give everybody a second here. All right, so this is great technology, great information. So as a water industry person, we're looking at lots of regulations and all these things are projected out years and lowering of the, per capita, all these numbers is causing quite a bit of a contentious debate. So it's great that a homeowner can have this at their fingertips to see how they're using their water and being responsible and efficient and all of that. But when you start depicting the presentation of these data as sort of like comparing California to the rest of the country, or saying that 40 GPCD is more than achievable, how are you prepared to speak to these issues? Because I would say when you start presenting the aggregate, now you're starting to talk into the policy world, and that becomes a very dicey adventure for many of us that have been through that.
Well, we want to talk to the policy world.
No, I was about to step that back.
No,
Peter.
you don't want to talk to policy. I mean, I want to
say-
give data. I want to present the data, and we're basically showing the data. I mean, so when I say we want to talk to the policy world, we want to show them this is what we are finding from the data that, that we're seeing. This is what we're seeing from thousands and thousands of customers, in these different jurisdictions. That's what I meant, Sarah.
That's totally fair. I would agree with that. But what I would actually say too is we're actually exceptionally cautious about this, June, right? Our goal is we're not here to be an enemy of anyone, whether it's the utility or the state. There's going to be a lot of policy decisions that need to be made. We're here to present data as we see it. And so we're also really cautious. And when we share this, when we're doing the use indexes, we're doing it across metro service areas, which might cover 6 utilities. It might cover 30 utilities, right? We do it for Los Angeles, which is as big as you're going to get. We do it basically aggregated across those communities. If individual utilities are interested in getting a sense of exactly where they stand, we will share that with them, but we're not publishing that anywhere else. And we give that to them really just to inform their decision-making process. We obviously are tracking very closely AB 1668 and SB 606 and all of the implications that may have. And we understand that there's going to be a lot of nuance and conversation and debate as that continues to both first starts to be implemented, but then continues to grow and change over time. Again, I think as Peter just said perfectly, our goal here is really to just provide information and really enable people with more data and more real-time data about what's actually happening in their community. So many of the utilities we work with, their greatest limitation is we don't have the ability to get this, or we haven't done this in a couple of years and we just don't know where we stand, because that will then inform, once they have the information, decisions that they need to make internally, whatever those may be. We also, are not going to just pull this data and hand it off to the state or any regulatory authority without kind of working with the utility first, because that's just not our place. Our goal really is to kind of just, we are sitting on some exceptional information, and this information is needed for everyone to make decisions about our future, whatever those conditions may be. That's kind of where we stand in all of this. And Joe, I don't know if you feel differently, but that's kind of our approach so far.
You said it well.
Yeah, well said.
I've always believed more data, certainly the better. And I see Amanda's hand up, but just on that part of who owns that data set, that's Flume, not the utility, right? And so,
yeah, correct.
And has there been any kind of challenges about Flume holding this data instead of having the utility or even a state agency holding this data? Because they'd have to go to you and you'd have to get the permission from the customers, right, to share that data.
So to answer
So
the
you go ahead,
latter
Joe.
question, so if a state agency like Department of Water Resources came to us and said, hey, we want to get some California numbers from you, we wouldn't be sharing individual customer level data with them. Certainly, we'd be sharing aggregate data with them. And, you know, if they wanted to hone that sample and say, hey, we only want data from homes that are between 500,000 and $1 million or whatever those were, we could hone that data. But again, not giving away any specific information, you know, what parcel numbers or addresses or any of that stuff we would not provide them with. Again, we only provide that type of data to a utility or an insurance company if we have the permission from the customer. So just to be clear about that.
I think
And then-
Amanda had her hand up, and then Heather.
Thanks again to all three of you. This has been super interesting. You talked a little bit about Marin, or maybe there are other counties or agencies you're partnering with. Have you seen this summer in any of the agencies you're working with where they've actually implemented something? Maybe you can't wash your car outside or reduce your water usage by X gallons, where you are actually able to provide data to the agency to say, yeah, that thing you implemented seems to be tracking the data this way, and this is how you can see if it's working or not?
Absolutely. Marin was a good example of that. In fact, we didn't show you this data, but you know, one of the restrictions they have is that people only use their overhead sprinklers outside, their spray irrigation. What was it, 2 times a week or 3 times a week, Peter? I think it's 2 times a week. And we could actually show them, you know, on average, people are only using their sprinklers, or actually using their sprinklers more than that. Not to use as a punitive tool, but basically to use as a tool to see if their restrictions are working. I thought this might be a fun time to actually show you another example, though, in Las Vegas.
Yeah, do that. Good idea.
So let me share my screen real quick.
I had the same thought. This is so one of the ways utilities work to restrict demand outdoors is to only allow irrigation on certain days of the week. And Las Vegas is an example of this, where they have a never on Sundays policy. I don't know if we have that ad, but they have a very funny ad with the hockey players like ready to take your head off if you happen to run your sprinkler on Sunday. So this shows data for every quarter from 2019 up to 2021 and where we averaged the outdoor use by day of the week. And look at Sundays. Every single quarter, Sunday has the lowest outdoor use. They can still, you're in Las Vegas, you can still do spot watering on Sundays with a hose, and I believe you're still allowed to fill your pool. So it's not unusual there to be some, but it's definitely evidence of you know, a day of the week restriction working.
I think what's even more interesting is when you look at it hourly. So what we're looking at here is basically every day of the week, and then the time of day. So this one is 1 a.m., 4 a.m., 7 a.m., 10 a.m., etc. So on Sundays, you can see there's not a whole lot of water going on. And when people do water, it's around 10 a.m. Again, we're just looking at outdoor use here. But Vegas also has a rule that you may not water between, again, I should have prepared better.
It's 7 and 11, right? It's 7
a.m.
p.m. and 11 a.m. or 10 a.m., I think.
Yeah, so let's look at Wednesday. So you'll see there's a big drop here. I think it's between 7 a.m. and I want to say 7 p.m. It's somewhere around there. But for instance, you see here that the outdoor water use drops markedly here. But actually, if we just look at Wednesday, so I'm just looking at the average of Wednesday. Hopefully it's going to let me do this.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the average of all the Wednesdays. And you can see here, oh, I'm sorry, you were right. 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. is what it is. So they can't water between 11 a.m. and then 7 p.m. is about here. So not quite good on the last hour, but pretty good in between here. So here's a great example of how we can show that, yeah, your water restrictions are working. And Vegas, by the way, actually enforces their water restrictions. I mean, they have these water cops that go around and fine people for not behaving. So you can see here, there's actually a real response.
Yeah, I also find it interesting that there's less irrigation at like 11 o'clock at midnight, which is actually a permitted time. So people like to see their sprinklers operating. So they set them up so that they're going to continue running into the morning where they could still get a gander at them, or where they run at the evenings, and they're much less likely to try to just have them run overnight where they don't get to see.
And were you able to actually see a reduction? Do you have data that goes back far enough to actually see whether the not having watering or having watering restrictions on Sundays actually results in a net decrease in?
Oh, no, we haven't done a volumetric analysis. So you know, they do this for a variety of different, you know, management reasons, and utilities don't always restrict demand just for volumetric purposes. A lot of times you'll assign watering days so you can shave the peak, you know, so not everybody waters on the same day. I don't think that's what's going on in Las Vegas, but no, they didn't ask us to make that particular analysis.
And Heather has her hand up. Heather?
Hi, yeah, this is Heather Rose. I'm actually calling from Austin, Texas. So a little bit different perspective down here. I had a question about, or kind of two questions about messaging, and they're kind of comment/question. So one of our big problems in Texas is we get super dry years and super wet years. And on a super wet year like this year, everyone's completely forgotten about drought and completely forgotten about water conservation. And just my question is about, have you all considered kind of fatiguing folks with messaging? And because you do run into the risk, it's a very fine line of, you want to get the message out and make sure folks are aware to do what's important for conservation, but when we reach a certain threshold, particularly on a wet year, folks get tired and they turn off the messages altogether. And then similarly, from the equity standpoint, like say I keep getting a message that, hey, you know, your toilet runs 4 gallons a flush. Did you know if you got a new toilet, it'd be like more like 1.5 gallons a flush? And it's like, I am well aware that my toilet uses too much water. I frankly don't have the money to replace it, even with the rebate. And it can be exhausting for some users to constantly get a message that it has good intentions, but again, running the risk of them shutting off messaging altogether because of that. So just wondering if that's been a conversation at Flume about how do you handle the risk of over messaging. We've just have this problem with other areas, for example, flood. Like how do you get through to people about flood safety, things like that?
First of all, Heather, that's a great question. And the good news right now is Flume doesn't do a whole lot of messaging. It just kind of presents the data. That said, there's a lot of work going on internal to figure out how do we best message our customers. And there's actually a lot of psychology that goes into that. And I can tell you the low-hanging fruit on messaging is stuff that's very prescriptive, such as, did you know that your zone 2 used twice as much water this week as it used last week? You've probably got a leak in zone 2. That's a useful message, right? It's not punitive. It's not you know, wagging the finger at you. So those are the types of things that we're going to focus on first. And I definitely agree with you. We've always said this from the beginning at Flume is we never want to send somebody a negative message. We want to send them helpful messages.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's where we're going to really focus our time and effort. So stay tuned on that front.
Cool. Yeah, and I also wanted to comment that y'all doing amazing work. I've been following your company for years,
Thank you.
You're growing like crazy. I'm really impressed, and
Thank you.
I'm loving the growth, and I'm hoping that Austin Water signs on at some point. But waiting. I know there's some complications.
Quite a few Flumes in Austin, actually some really good data from Austin.
Yeah.
You know, they've been doing a rebate program that they recently stopped doing for some reason. I think I'm hopeful that they'll start that again.
Yeah, I think it was a financial thing, but I know Karen Guz, I know I've worked with her and she's just said amazing things, and it's been like a game changer for SAWS Flume. So definitely hoping that Austin Water gets on board at some point.
Great. You know, one thing you said too, SAWS is struggling with the same thing, which is this has been a really wet year. And as you probably know, what happens is as soon as the rain drops and all of a sudden the aquifer levels start to go back down again.
Yeah.
That's the time to do some messaging. And what we're doing specifically in SAWS is we're not doing the messaging, but what's going to happen in September, they're going to basically send an email out to everybody and say, hey, by the way, now that the rain stopped, you're probably turning your irrigation back on again. And by the way, here's a cool tool to really help you monitor your water use, because your water bill is going to spike right back up again.
Right.
So kind of, not have that happen to you. So
Yeah.
it's more of a tool to kind of help them manage the water.
Yeah. Cool. Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions, comments. Are there other questions? Still have a few minutes, so let's see any other raised hands.
I have just a really simple question. How do you know if my house has a leak when I install this Flume device? What does the data tell you?
It is a good question.
That's a great question. So first thing is that Flume did a lot of research about leakage to understand what leakage in homes looks like and how to disaggregate it. And so the disaggregation process actually looks for a variety of different signals that might indicate a leak. One is water never shuts off for a certain period of time. That's just an obvious thing. But there's also then if there is periods of unusual usage, or usage where usually there's no usage, but suddenly there was unusual. So there's a variety of different approaches. But the most fundamental approach is to set a minimum volume of usage, and then if you don't see any zero usage occurring for a period of time, there's got to be a leak.
Yeah, and I would say that's the simplest way to do it. I'd say that catches more than 95% of the leaks. AMI uses something similar, where basically water never goes to zero. But the problem with AMI is, since it's 24 hours delayed, at the best case, you're not going to hear about that leak for 24 hours. Whereas in our system, since it's real time, you're going to hear about it much, much sooner, where water is not going back to zero.
Great question, Amanda. And so you're really defining leaks as sort of like small scale, not like catastrophic. I mean, those you'll see
catastrophic
right away,
yeah.
but
no, catastrophic
it's
leaks
also
are
catching these.
yeah. Catastrophic leaks we absolutely catch. That catastrophic leak is like the highest flow rate that's ever been observed. It's like bingo, you're gonna get an alert when there's a catastrophe. The other thing is a flapper leak, which actually, in a flapper leak, the flow can go to zero, and it often does, and then in another 10 minutes it leaks. The flapper refills. That is caught then through a more sophisticated analysis of the volume, so you're seeing usage throughout the day that's never stopping, or that's continuous throughout the day, even if there's gaps of zeros still.
Yeah. And one interesting thing too, I was going to throw in as well, is there's often like leaks by mistake, right? So it's a leak because you had, you didn't shut off the faucet properly, or there's the situations where we've had this number of times where someone set their irrigation sprinkler wrong and it's going off twice in the middle of the night. So everyone's asleep. They don't know about it. I guess that's not technically a leak, but it's a situation where people will then look at their water use and it's all well within the range of normal, but then they're looking at it and they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is insane. And then they're starting able to break down and say, oh, that's why. Okay, now I can finally fix this, which is really, really valuable as well. We also get funny stories of this has helped me stop my teenagers from taking hour-long showers, right? Like they can monitor that in real time. Someone told me once that they were on, and they were at work and they got an alert that there was water use at home that they weren't expecting. And they realized their teenager had skipped school and was home taking a shower. And so they were able to catch them. So it's funny the way that people use this, and everyone's different, but it can be really interesting to see what's going on.
Great examples of data at work. Any other questions? All right, we have NUD just dropped a question into the chat, or sort of a comment. first, she says, this is awesome. Could we expect a white paper in the future with approaches on how to detect and disaggregate information to actually get at some of this leak information? Be really helpful for utilities, particularly with AMI.
I actually think there are some basic routines, white papers already on that topic that cover some of the fundamental approaches for using hourly data for detecting leaks.
Yeah, with AMI, unfortunately, you don't have a whole lot of data, and I think you can, to some extent, detect leaks with AMI. I think to a lesser extent, you might be able to guess a little bit on indoor-outdoor use, and I know you've done some work with that, Peter, with varying results. But beyond that, there's not a whole lot you can do with the AMI data, unfortunately.
So, well, if there are no further questions, we'll say a huge thank you again to Flume. Wonderful. Really great to hear about this. Thank you to June for helping co-facilitate, and Amanda for all her work in pulling this together. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, guys.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.